I didn't realize how much I didn't know about leadership in that moment. And it was really shocking. And so for me, I went and what I call it was my leadership sojourn. I went and really studied and tried to understand leadership because I realized that if I didn't get better at leadership, that was what was going to happen with me. I was going to continue on my qualification journey, but I wouldn't be able to move people where I needed to move them.
Welcome to A Founder's Life. I'm your host, Leo Gestetner. On this show, we dive into the real stories behind the highs and lows of entrepreneurship and how we pursue a more balanced and meaningful life along the way. This podcast is sponsored by Thankz, helping founders like us scale with reliable remote talent. Email founders@thankz.com, that's THANKZ.com, with the subject line of Founder's Life, and you'll receive $1,000 off your first month. Now, I'm excited today to be joined by Robert Heath. Robert, thank you for joining us. Would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Pleasure being here. Thank you for having me, Leo. And to the audience, my name is Robert Heath Sr. I am the founder of the Legacy Leadership Consulting Group, and I like to call myself an alignment architect. And I can talk a little bit more about what that is, but suffice it to say that I help people to get into alignment.
So why don't you talk a little bit about what your path was that led you to what you're doing today, and then a little bit more about how you are helping your clients?
Yeah, no, great question. So how I got here is really a windy and circuitous route. I know we've talked a little bit off camera about the different things that you've done. And similarly, I didn't come to entrepreneurship and founding a business as a primary objective. As a matter of fact, much of my life when I was growing up was about service and trying to figure out how to improve the situations. I'm from Chicago originally, and I got to grow up. I got to see, I always say I got to see a tale of two cities. Right. I went to school and lived in certain neighborhoods that were definitely nicer, but we've also lived in certain neighborhoods where they weren't so nice. And I went to church in different places and had family in different places that saw the other side of the city, the part of the city that most people see when they look on the news. Right. And being able to see both places, I knew that there were different opportunities and different realities available to certain people. And that was something that I wanted to be heavily involved in making happen for Chicagoans and for people growing up in the inner cities all over the world. So originally I went into, of course, education, because how do we change lives? We teach and we train. And so I got a master's degree in education and became a teacher. And I was on my path to becoming a superintendent. And along that pathway to trying to change the world through education, I actually got a vision of my future, and it wasn't the future that I thought it was going to be. I was teaching in Memphis City schools at the time. The superintendent who had just come in was a Memphis City schools graduate who had gone out, gotten qualified, gotten the letters behind her name, done all the things to be in charge and to bring her vision to the city. I was like, oh, this is me. I can learn so much. And I was involved. I was a school improvement team coordinator. I went and gave my summers up and all the rest of that. And within 18 months, she was no longer the superintendent of schools. And I got to watch the dream that she had not take fruition. And it wasn't because she had slept with the wrong person or she had pilfered funds or any of the normal things that you would hear. It was just because she didn't have the skills and the ability to lead the district in the direction that she was trying to take them. She couldn't galvanize the people to rally around her vision so that they changed their behavior. And what shocked me about it was I thought that she was a good leader. I didn't realize how much I didn't know about leadership in that moment. And it was really shocking. And so for me, I went and what I call it was my leadership sojourn. I went and really studied and tried to understand leadership because I realized that if I didn't get better at leadership, that was what was going to happen with me. I was going to continue on my qualification journey, but I wouldn't be able to move people where I needed to move them. So I went to law school to learn and understand how rules are made, how society works. And then I went to what I like to call the greatest leadership training academy in the history of the world, United States Marine Corps. And I became a Marine Corps officer. And during my Marine Corps period of time, I got to command a company. I got to serve as a defense counsel and try cases. I got to see the system and I got to see leadership at all different levels. And that's what brought me to founding the Legacy Leadership Consulting Group, because one of the things that I learned along that leadership journey, my paradigm about leaders changed. I used to think that bad leaders were bad leaders because of some personal flaw, because they didn't work hard enough, because they didn't care about people enough, because they were too selfish or too, egocentric or power hungry. And what I learned that along this journey is that there's so many leaders out there that work very hard, that care a ton about people, and then that are mission first always, but they're still not succeeding at leadership. And a lot of leaders are suffering in silence because you can't just raise your hand and say, hey, I don't understand how to do this. I don't get it. Right. That's not how leadership works. And so they're suffering, and they're suffering even more because they know that their people are suffering because of what they don't know. And along that journey, I learned how to lead. As I said, I commanded a company of about 380 Marines and sailors while I was in the Marine Corps across 16 different sections and 3 different bases. And I received Navy Marine Corps Commendation Medal for my leadership of that company. So I found that I learned how to do this, but I also could teach it. And that's really how the Legacy Leadership Consulting Group was founded. It was built off of a core belief. I believe that everybody on this planet is here for a reason, that everybody has a seed of greatness within us, and that we have a purpose. And that purpose is to manifest that greatness and to be who we were created to be. And I believe that leadership plays a very pivotal role in that leadership is facilitating the manifestation of greatness in others. And that those of us who are privileged enough to see greatness in others have a duty to do what we can to remove obstacles and help that greatness to come to the fore. And I talked before about how I'm an alignment architect, and the basic idea is so often we're struggling and we're trying to do work, but it's just that we're out of alignment a little bit. And anybody that's ever driven a car that's out of alignment, you don't even realize it's out of alignment when you're driving 15, 20 miles an hour. You're just driving a car. Then when you start going a little bit faster, 30, 35 miles an hour, you start feeling that tug, that pull, and it becomes a little bit harder to steer, but you can still do it. You can still make it work. But then you get on the expressway and that car starts just rumbling and shaking like it's about to explode. And you realize that you can't drive it faster than a certain amount. Otherwise, everything feels like it's going to fall apart. And so some people will just continue driving slowly, right? 30, 35, 40 miles an hour. But other people will take their car to a mechanic, and the mechanic, when you take it, you're like, what's wrong with the radiator? What's wrong with the steering controls? What's wrong with the engine? What's going on? Something's wrong with my car. And they're like, it's just a couple of millimeters out of alignment. And they make that adjustment, and then the car can go 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 for some of you lead footers out there, right? Down the highway without having to do a lot of work to steer it. And that's really what we do. We help leaders to get in alignment, first of all, with themselves, so that they can do more, so that they can be more, so they don't feel like they're stuck and struggling, constantly putting out fires, and so that they can actually get more done with their time. And then we help them to also get their team aligned so that all of the stress of leading lots of people goes away. When you have people that are aligned to a mission, when you have people that are aligned to a vision, where their beliefs and their actions and their systems and their processes are all in alignment, the results take care of themselves. So that's a little bit about what I do for my clients and how we got there.
I love that description about the car being out of alignment. I think that's it's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And talk to us a little bit about what family looks like for you.
Yeah, so I am blessed to be the husband to Wendy and the father of Nadia and Robert Jr. My daughter is a freshman in college this year, so we are going through that first time experience. And we've got 2 freshmen, a freshman in college and a freshman in high school. So it's been a year of change for our family, to say the least.
Change is a good thing.
Yes.
How we move forward. And how about health? So whether you look at mental health, physical health, nutrition, how does health look?
Yeah, health is one of those things that I am learning more and more about how important it is. Of course, the older I get, I think there's so many facets of it, and it starts with mental health. And this is a lot of what we do when I'm helping people to get in alignment, to be able to mentally have your beliefs and your feelings and your emotions in alignment with your identity, and make sure that your identity is one that is powerfully driving you, rather than one that is making you feel guilt or shame or any of the negative emotions that pull you down. But then physically, that's something that I'm just getting into an understanding of, right? I was a Marine Corps officer. I was in shape most of my life. And even while I was in the Marine Corps, being in shape was something that was just a normal state of being. And one of the things that I've learned now that I'm in my 40s is that it's not as natural as I used to think that it was, that I actually have to make time for it and I have to plan for it. And so that's something that I'm on a journey of right now. And it's one of the things that, with the work that you do, it really stood out to me. Because that's a question that I didn't think I would need help answering when I was younger. And now as I'm getting older, it's so interesting how much I don't know about how to be healthy.
Yeah, I didn't need it answering when I was younger because I wasn't interested in the answer. Actually, maybe a better way of putting it is I didn't know to ask the question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of questions that I didn't realize I was going to have. Yeah.
I mean, I watch my kids as they get healthy, especially my son. He's on at the moment a sort of weightlifting journey, which he started with me, but has certainly exceeded me, which is always the aim. It's what we want for our kids.
Yeah.
And, when he started talking to me, I don't know, 6 months ago, that he was on a cut and then didn't go through a bulk.
A bulk. Yeah.
It's like a foreign language. Like,
Exactly.
not only did I not know, I certainly wouldn't have had a clue at his age. Like, when we were his age,
Yeah.
that knowledge wasn't there. I mean, you could have gone
Not
to
at
a
all.
library and read a really boring medical book and probably wouldn't have
Right.
told you much, and you'd have fallen asleep
Right.
trying to read it. But the knowledge is there now. If you're keen for the knowledge, and
Mm-hmm.
especially if you can look between all the rubbish out there and actually pick out the stuff that actually has value, then the knowledge is there. And I think that's just fantastic. Next
Yeah.
generation, you know, Generation Z, which are our kids,
Mm-hmm.
or even more so, I think they call it Generation Alpha,
Alpha.
that
Yeah.
next generation, the knowledge is so available.
Mm-hmm.
And I just love it.
Yeah, yeah, you and me both. I think that, the stuff that they've been able to have access to, right? And of course, too much information is difficult because then there's the whole discerning that's necessary. But I think by and large, the fact that, being involved in our children's lives and then them having so much more access, like just the things now I can coach my son so much easier than it was for my father to coach me, even in sports, because instead of just being able to tell my son what I think or what I know, even though I've coached sports and I've played sports, I can send him videos. I can send him other coaches saying the same thing that I want to say, but he can hear it from a different voice. And so I tag him in little YouTube shorts all the time when I find something, because he wants to play. He plays football, and so he wants to go to college and eventually hopefully play in the NFL. And so I'm giving him downloadable information now about what people in the NFL are saying, what coaches who coach for the NFL are saying. And so he's got access to so much more information. Whereas I remember when I was trying to become a basketball player, just knowing people who played basketball was difficult, right? We had a couple of people in our family, right? But they were few and far between. So I agree with you. The knowledge that they have is so much more powerful. And I honestly think that, my kids are light years ahead of where I was at their age.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you said sort of if they can get through to all the fluff, all the information that is out
Yeah.
there. I can't remember the exact
Yeah.
word you used. But the interesting thing is, I think it's a great skill they're learning because, if you think about, in the last, I'm going to call it 20 years, you could call it probably in the last 10 years, but
Mm-hmm.
certainly in the last 20 years, things have all become, whether it be the news is either completely one side or completely the other side. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. I could have
Mm-hmm.
sworn
Yeah.
20 years
Echo
ago things
chambers.
were relatively independent. I have no idea. Maybe they were all
Yeah.
biased, but we just accepted it. Who knows? But certainly now there is no independent
Yeah.
news.
Yeah. Not
It's
at all.
all bias on one side or bias on the other. And
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
think it's, the parallel to that is learning, what on, say, TikTok is some influencer jumping into the latest craze, which actually isn't correct, or what actually is correct. So I
Mm-hmm.
think they are learning
Yeah.
to get through that
Yeah.
on both sides.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that they're almost being forced. It's kind of like when you're bowling with bumpers, right? When you're bowling with bumpers, you don't have to focus on where you throw the ball or what you do. It's going to get down there. It's going to hit a couple of pins. Now, if you're going to be a really good bowler, even with bumpers, you got to figure these things out. But to be a decent bowler with bumpers, you don't have to get really good at it. But once you take those bumpers away, the people who train and the people who study, it becomes really obvious really quickly. And so I think to your point, our kids are having to figure out how to not throw gutter balls a lot faster. And it's making them better, faster at getting the ball down the lane, to keep with the analogy.
So what do you like to do for fun?
Good question. So my favorite things, I used to be a basketball player, like I said, but then I realized in my mid-20s that my knees weren't going to survive that if I kept going at the rate that I was going. So I picked up the game of golf. So I love golf. It's a game that intrigued me because people who were 3 times my age were kicking my butt. And that was something that was like, yes, this has good things for my future, because I can get better and better and better and compete against people no matter what age I am. So that was cool. And then I love jiu-jitsu. I think that the art of jiu-jitsu is something that is so awesome because I've studied a number of different martial arts, but one of the beautiful things that I love about jiu-jitsu is that it allows you to meet force with a measured response rather than a total and complete response. And it allows you to engage with someone without having to be completely pugilistic and combative, even though they may be completely pugilistic and combative. And so it allows us to maintain humanity, even if we are engaging in conflict.
Another excellent one. So how does balance look for you?
Good question. So I have a kind of contrarian view about balance, but I think that in all, balance is equilibrium. It is what we seek, right? It is what we strive for. I think that one of the ways that people think about balance is that they think of the different parts of themselves trying to all balance. And I'm a big fan of looking at balance from the perspective of harmony, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that everything has equal weight or that everything has equal time. For example, work, life, community service, etc. It doesn't mean that it's equal as much as it means that the integration of the things creates something beautiful, right? If you think about music in a symphony, every instrument isn't playing at the same pace, at the same note, at the same pitch, at the same timbre, or even at the same volume. But when those all come together harmoniously, they create a beautiful sound, and the experience of the person who is engaging with it is actually magnified because of the integration of all of them rather than just hearing the individual parts by themselves. And so I think that we as human beings, our goal is to integrate all of the parts of our lives such that there's a synergistic effect, so that when I go to work, because of the fact that I'm aligned at home, I'm better at work. And then what I do at work helps me to be better in the community. And then what I do in the community helps me to be better at home. And so I'm constantly in a virtuous circle, or a virtuous spiral, if you would, elevating myself, because every day that I'm in alignment, everything about me gets better.
And it's always best to be in a virtuous circle rather than a vicious circle.
Yes.
So, yes. And what for you has been a pivotal moment in your life?
It's a great question. I think the biggest pivot that changed my life was when I realized that I was never going to play professional basketball. So I had grown up always wanting to be a professional basketball player. And at various times in my life, there were other things that were more important. So when I was in school, school was more important than sports. So I focused on school. I graduated high school early. I went to college, and I would always play rec ball or intramural balls. I stayed in shape, stayed in playing, but then I went to go get a college degree, and I wasn't playing ball and going to college. I was just doing one. But I was always putting in the time in intramurals and in, different things. And so over time, I then went to graduate school, got my master's degree, began teaching, but I was always close to basketball, always playing. And a lot of the people that I was friends with went and played professionally overseas or played even in the NBA. But for me, it was always later. It was always, I'll get to that. I'll do that. It's not time right now. It wasn't the number one focus because I had other focuses. And then I got to be about 27 years old. I'm married. I've got my daughter. My wife and I have our daughter at that time. And I realized that later had become never. And I remembered all the different opportunities, like the chance that I had to play professionally in Costa Rica when I was studying abroad. And I didn't take it because of, fear or any, worrying about things. And that moment when I had that regret, like it sat with me, it was like a wet blanket. Like I couldn't get happy. I couldn't feel comfortable. And it was a fear that I had as well, because like, what if I regretted more and more things throughout the rest of my life? And I remember in that moment, I was like, I never want to feel this feeling again. I never want to feel regret. I don't mind if I try and I fail. I don't mind if I go for it and it just is in the cards. If that's not God's plan for me, I don't have a problem. But what I never want to feel again is like I had an opportunity to do something that I wanted, and I didn't take that opportunity because of fear, because of, not doing what was necessary to take advantage of it. And from that moment forward, like I said, that was right about the time where the superintendent had left, and I was realizing that I need to be a better leader. And all of that was kind of coalescing at the same time. And that's why I was able to make that start transition and move to going to law school, to going to Marine Corps, because those were things on my list. I wanted to go to law school and practice law. I wanted to serve in the military. I wanted to be a business owner at some point in time in my life. And up until that point, I had always kind of thought about it as, in the future. And I realized that wasn't promised. And so that pivot has created all of the things that have come after that.
And what's one piece of advice you would give to an aspiring entrepreneur?
That's a great question. I'm trying to limit it to one. Realize that this is a marathon and not a sprint, and that it's okay if you don't know, because you never know as much as you think you know. And over the course of the process, you never need to know as much as you think you need to know to be successful.
Perfect. And I did a marathon 4 days ago, so I get that one. And what I think also is, adding into really or mirroring what you said. I wrote a blog the other day, and I talked about, I've always believed in surrounding myself with people smarter than I am.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to or need to be the smartest guy in the room. I prefer to hire the smartest guy in the room.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. And to add to that, I think allowing myself to not know was the thing that allowed me to be in the room with people that were smarter than me and not feel an inferiority complex, right? Because a lot of times I would intentionally put myself in rooms with people who were better than me, and then I would shrink and I wouldn't be able to ask questions. I wouldn't be able to feel comfortable because I didn't feel like I belonged now, right? And so giving myself permission to not know and to be in those rooms and to realize that that's the journey. It's learning, it's growing, and that's actually how all of those people who were in the room that you think you don't belong in, that's how they got there. It's not as if they've just always been these savants who've known everything. They were learning, and that's the process. And that's why you belong in that room, because it's your turn to learn from them. And then sometimes you'll be in those rooms with other people and you'll be teaching. But as the entrepreneur, get in those rooms and feel like you belong in those rooms, like it's okay for you to not know being in those rooms.
Love it. So how can people find you?
So the best way to find me is to go ahead and just shoot me an email, robert@tllcg.com. You can also go to my website, robertheathsr.com. That's robertheathsr.com. And you can get connected to me there. And then I'm also on LinkedIn, Robert Heath Sr. And it's, for fun, because I love James Bond. 007 is at the end. Robert Heath SR 007. You can find me on LinkedIn.
Well, thank you for joining us today.
Been my pleasure, brother.
And thank you for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed the conversation, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, tell your friends, and please leave a review.